This video is sponsored by the wonderful members of my Patreon and by CuriosityStream. Hey everyone, welcome back. There's a few housekeeping things I want to note about before we start this video. If you don't care, skip to right here, then you can get into it. First, I want to say thank you to everyone who has been watching and following me. We have two big announcements. So one is that I'm officially changing the name of this channel from Melina Pendulum to Princess Weeks. Princess Weeks is my name, and I started Melina Pendulum when I was 15 going on 16. And at the time, it was really a place for me to express my frustrations, sometimes laced with early aughts misogyny about Twilight and dealing with a lot of my issues with YA. And while there's a lot of those things in those videos that I still understand but would express differently, I have become a different kind of creator, and while I don't want to get rid of all of those videos, they don't represent who I am. And part of why I developed Melina Pendulum was because I thought that for me to be successful, there would have to be a division between who I was on here and my professional life. But I've always treated this platform is something that I had to be my best self at on some level, and at least come to a certain level of integrity and care, because as a Black woman in this medium, I knew I wasn't gonna get a lot of chances to do things. So while I am very proud of what I've gained with Melina Pendulum, and it has a legacy that's very proud to me, I love when people call me Melina and recognize me as Melina, especially because it's my favorite Mortal Kombat character. I'm Princess Weeks, and I'm ready to embrace that and bring those two sides of myself together. So on April 1st, the beginning of Aries season of April, I will be officially changing the channel name from Melina Pendulum to Princess Weeks. So when you see it, don't be alarmed if you don't see Melina Pendulum anymore. Don't be alarmed. I'm not gone. I'm just embracing all that I am, and I'm excited about that. And I appreciate you guys for all being on this journey with me. And my cat has gotten up from her bed for the first time in 3 hours, ladies and gentlemen. And I will be turning 30 April 6th, which is really exciting because I've always wanted to be in my 30s ever since I was 12 years old. Dreams do come true in New Orleans. I've had a few people ask me what I want for my birthday. I don't really want anything from my followers. You guys are so supportive of me and you do enough. I say if you don't follow me on Patreon and thought about following me on Patreon, please do. I've been doing more write-ups on there. I have an exclusive video coming out soon about Set It Off, going to be on Patreon. And I guess we can pivot to the ad for a second. If you follow me on Nebula as part of the CuriosityStream Nebula platform, soon you will have a video about passing coming out there. So if you like my work and you want to support me for my birthday, that's great. Or if you're looking for someone else to support, I would recommend Julesy, who is doing her Smart Brown Girl book club. They have a GoFundMe up right now. If you support her, that would be lovely. So just thank you guys for all your support. And I know some people were asking finally if I was okay last week because I mentioned that I looked like shit. I have, I am relocking my hair, and that is an experience because I never really liked myself with short hair, and it is a bit of an adjustment. And when I was editing myself, I could see that my septum ring was slightly askew, and I could see that my lipstick was slightly askew, and I hadn't worn a full face of makeup, so I was like, look at my under eye bags. When you edit your own videos, it's a very intense experience. So that is why I was dismissing myself, and partly having been on this platform since I was 15, I very much operate from I'll insult me before you insult me situation. And I will be drinking for this video. I am drinking Arizona iced tea and rum. And I only drink rum that is made and owned by Black people, because rum has a very, very harsh colonial history, and I find it very weird that there's a rum called plantation rum. So the rum I'm drinking today is called Bakuman rum, crafted in Haiti. It's a Haitian rum. This rum is named after a man named Dati Bakuman, who sparked a revolution in Haiti, which is seen as a precursor to the Haitian Revolution, and it is co-owned by a Black Haitian woman. I have been drinking it. It's very good. So if you're looking for a rum to support, I would pick that one. So let's dig a little deeper and get some soul glow. Growing up, there was no Disney princess who represented me. When I dressed up as a character from Disney as a little kid, I dressed up as Esmeralda. Her skin was dark, her hair was big and curly, and even though she had green eyes, her experiences and her identity seemed Black to me. 6-year-old princess was not familiar with Romani culture, cultural appropriating little adolescent. When it comes to Disney and Blackness, they have a really bad track record on the subject, especially because, you know, minstrelsy is the root of animation and therefore the original sin of animation, but that's a longer video. But just so you know, minstrelsy and Disney go way, way back. If I was gonna name like good Black representation in Disney, just in terms of characters that have more than one moment of screen time, you've got the Muses.
We are the Muses.
Powerline from a Goofy movie. Sweets, who's also Afro-native in Atlantis.
My father was an army medic. He settled down in the Kansas territory after he met my mother.
No kidding.
Nope. I got a sheepskin from Howard U and a bear skin from old Ironclad.
The Afro-Colombian characters in Encanto.
Hey, grew to live in fear when I'm stuttering or stumbling. I can always hear him sort of muttering and mumbling. I associate him with the sound of falling sand.
And Tiana.
Getting closer and closer every day, and I'm almost there.
Disney has a notable history of racist shorts, stereotypes, and just not being good at diversifying the people who work for them in order to craft more meaningful moments of representation. The Princess and the Frog and Soul are the two Black firsts for the studio, the first Black Disney princess and the first Pixar movie with a Black lead, each attempting to gain representation clout from young and old who have been socialized for generations to view the company as synonymous with universality of experience. Now, this criticism of Soul and Princess and the Frog, or really any polarizing BIPOC animated creation, does not dismiss the feelings of those who may connect with these products, who feel represented by it, or dismiss the one BIPOC creators often brought into these works as an authenticity consultant. You are allowed to like these movies. Me making these arguments does not dismiss that. Calling out the failures of crafting diversity around a company that focuses on themes and topics but not actually dealing with Blackness or otherness has led to these films universally failing, in my opinion, to say anything. And we're gonna explain why, with The Princess and the Frog and Soul, why they don't work to me, why I think that they really mismanage the intentions of their work, why basically Tiana deserves better, and how jarring it is to see this perpetual lack of investment in Black American and Black culture from Disney when clearly they have the ability to do this with other products, even when they don't have an extremely diverse team behind the scenes. Which brings the question about why they seem to fail so much harder at Blackness than other things. So let's start with The Princess and the Frog.
The evening star is shining bright.
The Princess and the Frog was the 49th Walt Disney animated film and was co-written and directed by Roger Clements and John Musker, with guidance from screenwriter Rob Edwards, who is African American. We will get to that point. Tiana is a 19-year-old waitress from New Orleans whose father died during World War I. He had a dream of owning a restaurant, which has become Tiana's dream. She works 2 jobs in order to save up enough money to buy the old mill that will be transformed into Tiana's place.
But I know exactly where I'm going.
Prince Naveen of Maldonia is a cut-off playboy prince who has come to America to marry a rich woman, going the dollar princess way.
Your lifestyle's high, but your funds are low. You need to marry a little honey whose daddy got dough. Mom and Dad cut you off, huh, playboy?
Sad but true.
Tiana's childhood friend Lottie LaBeouf has always dreamed of being a princess and is white and rich, So she hires Tiana to make food for the party Naveen is going to be attending. She gives Tiana enough money that will allow her to buy the mill to open her restaurant. Unbeknownst to all of them, Naveen, during his trip, made a deal with the Shadow Man, Dr. Facilier, a witch voodoo doctor who cons Naveen's valet, Lawrence, into transforming Naveen into a frog in order to steal Charlotte's money, which they will split. Naveen gets turned into a frog and ends up running into Tiana on a balcony after she's just suffered a racism due to her being outbid for the mill, and the banker saying that her background would have made things too hard for her, all while eating her fucking food.
Which is why a little woman of your background would have had her hands full trying to run a big business like that.
By the way, I'm cursing in this video, so just be prepared. Naveen thinks because of the way Tiana is dressed that she is a princess and asks for a kiss in order to change him back into a human, and he will give Tiana money in return. Tiana kisses Naveen and gets turned into a frog, and they end up going into the bayou, meet two very annoying talking animals, and slowly fall in love as Naveen learns to mince and Tiana learns to relax. So obviously they start falling in love. That's my cat taking a poop. Mama Odie tells them how to break the spell the straightforward way, so they return to New Orleans in order to try and turn Naveen back into a human by kissing Lottie.
That's right. Big Daddy's king of the Mardi Gras parade. So that makes Lottie a princess.
Does that count?
Yes, it does.
Dr. Facilier ends up killing second annoying sidekick Ray, and the totem he uses is destroyed by Tiana, so he's dragged to hell very Rasputin-y. It's a pretty cool sequence. Frog, Naveen, and Tiana get married, kiss, and due to Tiana being made a princess by this marriage, it breaks the spell and they both are human again.
Like I told y'all, kissing a princess breaks the spell.
Once you became my wife, that made you...
A princess. You just kissed yourself a princess.
And I'm about to do it again.
Now married, and I guess now this has given her a singular friend, Tiana opens her restaurant and she has a husband she still has to financially support, but she's a princess now and has learned that you can't have it all. A man, animal friends, and a successful life. For me, one of the big problems with The Princess and the Frog, and eventually with Soul, is that it was a concept developed by a bunch of white guys who picked a setting and then the blackness came on as a gradual thing. In fact, Jamie Foxx's character in Soul was originally a white dude who wanted to be a rocker, but again, we're talking on Tiana right now, we'll get to it eventually. It was actually John Lasseter's idea to set this story in New Orleans, and he wanted to do this several years before Katrina. The reason was he loves that city and thought it would be a great location to set an animated movie. We liked the idea of doing an American fairy tale, and the setting suggested using elements of jazz. Suggested using elements of voodoo, having an African-American heroine, and the approach to the music. The big twist of having our heroine turn into a frog when she kissed the frog came from a children's book called The Frog Princess by E.D. Baker, which Disney bought the rights to in 2003. Many of the characters in our version, including Mama Odie, Tiana, and Ray the Cajun Firefly, were inspired by actual people we met in our research trips to New Orleans. Other twists came from the basic desire to use iconic fairy tale and Disney archetypes, but do a spin on them to make the movie fresh. In retrospect, it was certainly about time, but we didn't approach this movie with that as any kind of agenda. We all thought it was a great idea, but it wasn't until later we fully realized the importance of this in the African American community. They didn't realize that, you know, it mattered that they finally had a black princess, but you know, okay. Tiana herself ended up being inspired on Leah Chase, a Creole American chef from Louisiana who passed away in 2019. Of course, things like segregation were a huge part of her story, but the movie doesn't actually know how to commit to the truth of the historical period that they picked. One of the problems of putting a film like this in an American setting, especially in 1926, is that the film wants to acknowledge but not deal with anything deeper than that setting. The cultural elements are not really as well integrated as they will be in other first princess movies. If you were around back in the day, then you will probably remember they initially named Tiana Madeline, or Maddie for short. Madeline, but I'm calling her Maddie.
Nah, I ain't never been with a baddie. She calm, so I added to the tally. Madison, but I'm calling her Maddie.
Then everyone realized that Maddie was kind of a typical sort of slave name. They decided, we'll just give her a Greek name and name her Tiana. Rob Edwards was eventually brought in to be a sensitivity reader, but he is one black person who might not even be from the same background that Tiana is supposed to be from. Like, I'm a black person, but I'm not from New Orleans. That's not my background. I just can't authenticity read you based on my blackness, especially when you're getting into the nuances of hoodoo and voodoo. But watching the film, I'm just reminded of how gorgeous Tiana is and how it is literally a crime that she was transformed into a frog and remains that way for the majority of the film. You designed one of the most beautiful animated faces ever. Like, her face is just so gorgeous, and I did nothing with it. It's so disrespectful. And I was just talking to my sister about it, but like, I really hate all of the animal sidekicks in this movie. Like, the alligator, whose name I forget, is terrible, but Ray the firefly is so annoying. And I was talking to my sister, and I was like, well, there's one moment where she was like, there's one moment when I liked him, even though he was annoying. I was like, oh, when he dies. And we're just like cracking up, because yeah, that is the only good moment of that character, is when he dies. And it kind of reminds me of how I cried when Dobby dies in Harry Potter. Like, I hate Dobby. He's an annoying pick-me house elf, but I still cried every time he would die in the first Deathly Hallows movie. I'd be like, my nigga's a free elf. I want to focus on, oh God, my cat pooped and it smells awful. Ugh. I want to focus on two things I think stand out for me as a viewer when I watched it again for this video. One, the lack of community, and two, the lack of faith. At the start of the movie, and one of the few visual representations of segregation in the film, we see Tiana and her mother going home, making gumbo with her father, and then sharing it on the porch with her community.
Hey everybody, I made gumbo.
Ooh, that smells good. I got some hush puppies, Tiana. That brought.
You know, the thing about good food, it brings folks together from all walks of life. It warms them right up and it puts little smiles on their faces.
This is the first and last time we see Tiana in a sort of black community setting. Tiana is not around a lot of black people in the movie for any significant amount of time. She has those two nameless friends that come in. Her best friend isn't black. Her prince isn't black. Facilier, the main antagonist, isn't even in conflict with Tiana. Mama Odie is there, but only at the end to serve a MacGuffin purpose. She isn't even really a fairy godmother. She kind of just gives song emotional exposition of the moral of what you're supposed to learn here. Tiana's mother and Tiana's father end up having no purpose in the film. The only other black man we really see talk in the film, besides her dead dad and the villain, is the black male chef that makes fun of her, and that's it. That's the black male representation you get in this movie. Villain, dead dad, asshole chef. The lack of a black community is striking, and I get that they wanted to make it palpable for a white audience because that's what they do. But Lottie could have easily been a light-skinned Creole. We could have had Tiana getting a black friend with a name. But yet we never return to this black neighborhood, which feels like a very amateurish decision because you are establishing that segregation is a thing, but then not actually going through with it in any significant way, even visually. Also, taking inspiration from Leah Chase, part of why she started her restaurant was to serve food that otherwise would only be available at whites only places. Chase was a highly political figure whose restaurant was one of the only public places in New Orleans where African Americans could meet and discuss strategies during the civil rights movement. Like, Leah Chase and her husband Edgar would host black voter registration campaigns. You know, they hosted the NAACP, black political meetings, and many other civil leaders at their restaurant, including Martin Luther King Jr. and the Freedom Riders. If you're gonna use her as an inspiration, you need to include all the layers of what her story is inspirational for, which is being this restaurateur in the face of segregation. Plus, if there was segregation, it would at least make Charlotte's friendship and Big Daddy's going to Tiana's restaurant more meaningful, because it's just kind of hand-waved and colorblind instead of it being seen as a real significant thing that they do go to a Black woman's restaurant. And it's also weird that Charlotte is being able to just marry a random, very visibly brown man, royalty or not. It's just, again, it's very jarring that it's there and never explained because you include white people. Because if you notice in Aladdin, in Mulan, in Encanto, you aren't including traditional waspy figures to muddy the waters of your story. And once you have a story in America in this time period with white people and Black people, you cannot ignore color. Faith is another thing that is missing from the film. There are, of course, Black agnostics and atheists. I'm a pagan. I'm not really, I wasn't raised in the Black church. But one thing that most Black people from across the diaspora grow up with is some sort of spirituality. This is not really present in the film, but it is symbolically there, in my opinion, in the form of the evening star that Lottie wishes upon. And this to me is very important, not because I think the movie needs to be religious, but because there is something tied to the whole Black experience of work and wishing and faith and hope. Tiana's whole thing is that wishing on stars is a waste of time, that everything can be achieved by hard work. It's not a bad message, it just feels very generic, especially when, if you look at Black folks in enslavement, you will hear these great stories of faith and belief tied with hard work. It's like, duh, yes, we know we need to work hard, we know we need to accomplish it, we know who we are, but believing in something deeper also fuels the motivation for what you're doing. So her whole very cynical thing about that stuff just feels very bland. It also doesn't give her any personality traits besides, wow, she sure works hard, which feels like actively trying to avoid stereotypes but not filling with any purpose that makes Tiana a living, breathing character. One of the things that is really a key issue, and something that happens in Riot as well, and also tying into faith, voodoo is an African diasporic religion. It's not just magic. So it's disturbing to see Dr. Facilier being portrayed as evil and voodoo mostly in this evil lens. Also, they originally wanted to name him Dr. Duvalier, but, quote, we didn't want to confuse him with the ruler of Haiti with that same name. And by ruler of Haiti, they mean Francois Duvalier, aka Papa Doc, who created a repressive government which murdered and exiled people and warping the concept of Haitian voodoo around him. So for that to be their first choice of name is very suspect. Also, Louisiana voodoo, Haitian voodoo, hoodoo, obia, Santeria, they're all like first cousins. They have the same grandparents, but different mamas and daddies. Like there's overlap, but they're not inherently the same. Facilier's image is kind of a mixture of Baron Samedi and Gidi Nimbo. Gidi Nimbo is like the leader of the spirits of the dead and is portrayed as like this effeminate dandy who makes humans get super sexual when he inhabits them. He also likes to dress in drag. He's like, chaotic, pansexual, but also a leader. Baron Samedi is his adoptive father. He's depicted of having like the top hat, black tailcoats, dark glasses, cotton plugs, and Papa Doc's usage of Samedi's image kind of warped the way that he is viewed in sort of like the mainstream. But in general, Baron Samedi is a powerful spirit who is like the Iowa of resurrection, like a master of the dead. Like he can make curses and black magic stronger, but it's not all that he does. He's like, and tying it back to like zombies, he makes corpses rot in the ground so they can't be brought back as zombies, which, very thoughtful of him. And I don't like that they use his figure to make him evil. Like if you look in the background of Friends on the Other Side, you can see some of the religious symbols in the sequence. But overall, the way voodoo is shown is very cliche and messy. And to me, one of the things I think is very frustrating about Princess and the Frog as a film is that it makes very weak character structure arcs. They don't really do a compelling want versus need as compared to even other Disney princesses, you know, even the weakest of them all. They are afraid to have her stand for anything because they don't want to have an agenda. But you are creating the first Black Disney princess. You were putting her in an American setting, so you're creating the first African American princess as well. There are so many stories there to be told. I mean, if it were to just be elitist, there are talented tents. There are whole elite Black societies. You could have done it if you just wanted to ignore race and just do Black excellence. There's a lack of real commitment to what this experience would look like, a lack of really understanding what voodoo looks like. I mean, we have East Bayou. You could easily do a New Orleans Creole voodoo inspired fairy tale element, but they don't want to do that because they're afraid of doing the wrong thing, which is very suspect because they made Aladdin where they cut off your ear if they don't like your face. It's barbaric, but hey, it's home. Like, I guess in the 10 years since, they were like, we gotta be really careful, you guys. Because they're trying to be so careful, they don't take any risk. And again, if they had more people than just one Black consultant, then maybe you could have had a stronger story. You could have made more ambitious decisions. And I think that's the kind of thing that really disappoints me, is that Tiana is a character all about ambition, but the movie has none. It has no power behind anything that it's saying. It's really relying on the power of these Black voices, because they hired some heavy hitters. Jennifer Lewis, hello, the Black godmother. You know, they hire Oprah to be the mother, which I'm like, okay. I mean, you should have put Angela Bassett, but she's gonna be in Soul. It's fine. But again, they just pick very generic choices and are using the Blackness and visibility and representation to guide them through what is a very poorly constructed story. And especially because, and I think the biggest sin of everything is that Facilier and Tiana have no connection until like the very end of the film. And it's like, you have it where your villain and your antagonist and your protagonist have no connection to each other. It's all about Naveen. It's all about Lottie. It's never really about Tiana. And that is a disservice to that character. If she doesn't need to learn anything, she doesn't really need to grow. And usually that's not really a big deal when it comes to a Disney movie, but like, she wants to own a restaurant, but her need is to not work hard. It's a very white thing of like, Dad, why do you work so hard? You know, Black women have to work hard. And as my friend put it, like when she was helping with this video, like Black women had to work hard. They did it as an act of love and not because they were like obsessed with career. It's like, it would have been so much more powerful to have Tiana wanting to build this restaurant because she wanted to actually build something for Black people. She wants to build something that her father could never make and fighting for her people. And Naveen, who is not from the Americas, being like, oh, I didn't realize this is how it would be. And it's like, you know, it's disappointing they would never do that because it's Disney, but in response, they don't make anything. So they offend no one and just make a very weak, terrible movie with one of the most beautiful animated characters they've ever made. So, you know, at least we have her face. Very annoying. And God, my cat's poop smells. I need to clean this out, but if I get up from this sofa.
All right, let's try something else. From the top. Ready. 1, 2, 3.
Soul is a pro-life movie and also just very, very boring. Joe Gardner is a New York City music teacher who dreams of playing jazz professionally. He is offered a full-time teaching position that his mother is very excited about.
So you're going to tell them yes, right? Please say yes.
But on the same day, Big Game or Musical. On the same day, he finds out that Dorothea Williams is in need of a piano player and auditions. She is impressed and Joe's excited to do this, and he ends up being on his phone and falling down a manhole. He dies, but refuses to go to the great beyond and ends up escaping into the great before, where he is mistaken for a mentor by the Jerrys. He's assigned to mentor 22, a soul who has yet to find her spark. Joe reveals who he really is to 22, and she decides to help Joe find a way back to his body. They end up getting help from a spiritual person in the zone, and when trying to return Joe into his unconscious body, he ends up dragging 22 with him and putting 22 in his body and Joe going into the body of a cat. 22 lives as Joe and is more empathetic and has poignant conversations with other Black people in a way Joe never does.
Huh, how come we never talked about your life before?
You never asked, but I'm glad you did this time.
Looking good, brother. Great show.
I grabbed a couple road lollies.
In the end, 22 has a desire to find her spark, but doesn't want to go back just yet. Terry, a soul counter, captures both of them and brings them back to the great before. They find out that, oh, surprise, 22 has her spark now, but Joe tells her that she only got it because of him, because she was in his body. Even recapping this movie is so dull. I'm sorry to people who love Soul. I know people like it. Apparently did very well on Rotten Tomatoes, but I'm just like, this is not, it's not good to me. Joe goes back into his body, he plays, fulfills his dreams, but it is not what he expected. He's kind of bleh about it.
I heard this story about a fish. He swims up to this older fish and says, I'm trying to find this thing they call the ocean. The ocean, says the older fish, that's what you're in right now. This, says the young fish, this is water. What I want is the ocean.
He feels guilty about 22, goes back into the zone to save 22, who again is a spirit that hasn't even been conceived yet. And because he's willing to give up his life and his experience to help her get her life, he is gifted his life back and is now intent to live life to the fullest, and no one knows the decision he makes. The end. God, I hate Soul. I wish I didn't. I wish I liked it. But I just, it's so bad. Why are our movies so about work? The film Soul was not made with Blackness in mind. Pete Docter, who came up with the idea, the character of Joe wasn't a Black man until much later in the movie's production, when co-director and co-writer Kemp Powers, who is a Black man, came into the movie. Joe became Black when they decided to make Joe a jazz musician, and they were like, hey, jazz, that's Black. We've done Black jazz before. We'll do that again. Hey, creative guys, Black Americans are responsible for all the things that you like, music-wise, pop culture-wise, in this country, not just jazz, you know. If you made him a rock star, he could still be a Black man because a Black woman invented rock and roll, so. Okay, it's like, have you never heard of X-Ray Specs? I can't. You can't. Jimi Hendrix, like, we can do it all, guys. Like, you don't have to just be like, jazz. In many ways, it's actually hilarious how much Soul and Prince and the Frog have in common, problematic-wise. Like, due to 22 being in Joe's body, you inherently limit the amount of time that Joe actually spends in his community. We see 22 navigate being a Black man easier than a Black man, which could have actually been interesting if they actually talked about the racial anxieties of trying to make it in New York City as a Black man in music. But no. He just works too hard. To quote Charles Pullman Moore's excellent review that he did of Soul, after 22 threatens to toss Joe out of the barbershop at the barber's insistence that the cat behaves, she winds up having the kind of deep, meaningful conversation with the man that Joe never could due to his feeling uncomfortable expressing himself. It's in scenes like this, or later in the film when Joe interacts with his mother and her friends, all of whom are Black, that Soul comes across less like an earnest and casual celebration of everyday Blackness, and more like a twee depiction of it that's meant for white audiences' consumption. Even though Soul has two leads, this dynamic highlights how the movie often ends up treating Joe as a supporting character. His relative otherness to 22, who again reads as white in every aspect save for the character's looks, is supposed to be the wondrous, life-changing thing that ends up giving 22 her spark to become a person. Get Out, but with a better message, which is not a joke I came up with. Someone else did it, I just don't remember who they are. But shout out to the person who made that joke. It was passed along to me. Very good. But they keep saying that they built Blackness into the bones of this movie in interviews. And if that was the case, honestly, you wouldn't have Tina Fey be the voice of 22. Like, every couple of months on Twitter, we, the Black community, graciously tell you the white people we collectively fuck with. Dolly Parton, Jane Fonda, Kelly Clarkson, Haley Williams, Celine Dion, all the Gilmore Girls, rest in power. And you had to pick the one that has had issues with blackface and race in the bodies of work associated with her. Like, that's who you picked to be 22?
By the way, why do you sound like a middle-aged white lady?
I don't. This is all an illusion.
Huh?
This whole place is a hypothetical.
I could sound like this if I wanted to.
Or sound like this instead.
I could even sound like you.
Life is so unfair. I don't want to die. Somebody call the ambulance.
I just use this voice because it annoys people.
It's very effective.
Tina Fey. You couldn't even get a Jenny Slate. Rashida Jones is right there, guys. Tracee Ellis Ross is right there, guys. It would have been amazing to see 22 be another young black man actually build up a mentorship with that character. Or if you wanted to be a cis woman. Again, Tracee Ellis Ross is right there. Tiffany Haddish. It's just a very jarring choice. And let's get into how the film wants us to think that he cares about teaching. He is not a good teacher unless the student already cares. Like, when his student comes in wanting his help while he's in his cat body, he don't give a damn about that kid. He was like, let her go. And it was 22 who was like, let me like reverse psychology you.
Bye, Mr. G. See you next week.
22!
So Connie came here to quit, but then she didn't.
22, forget about that. Listen.
I need to know this, Joe. Why didn't she quit?
Because she loves to play. She might say she hates everything, but trombone is her thing. She's good at it. Maybe trombone is her spark. I don't know. Please, if I'm gonna get this gig back, I need your help.
You know, there's nothing wrong with having a day job that you do as you pursue your art. That is literally what fuels the restaurant industry on both coasts. I worked as a book retail person for nearly 5 years. We all have our hustle. And I don't get why, like with Tiana, there's this need to shame Joe for wanting to take a chance, for working hard for a dream. I mean, say he does stuff well with Dorothea Williams stuff. Then he's got a job. And if he doesn't, he still has a full-time job. So what's the issue? You know, he's a music teacher who's about to get benefits and a promotion. He can perform at night. I don't get why we have two black movies with this very similar message of work-life balance. And the pro-life aspect of it, I know was made a little muddy because of Ben Shapiro calling it unintentionally pro-life. And while I get wanting to disagree with him because he's a terrible human being, you still have to grapple with the fact that this is a movie that is actively about the souls of the unborn, particularly one particular unborn wanting to live, and they are portrayed as equal to the life of someone who has lived a full life. And that is inherently accidentally pro-life. Within the film, it says that there is a great before and a great beyond. And you will notice that this does not tell you in the film when the soul enters the body, because they know that if they say anything and make it a stance, it will be an issue. So they don't say anything. But here's the thing. You can have films that speculate about pre-life and not necessarily make it a pro-life movie. But you actually have to not be a coward and pick a zone or like pick how you're portraying a before life. Because if you don't, and you do this weird, oh, they have a soul before they even get into the body, it lends itself to a pro-life meaning. And a pro-life meaning that says that the life of a black man is equal to the non-existent life of this Tina Fey soul. And here's part of the interview with Doctor talking about the film. At the beginning, the pitch was really just, where do babies come from? Soul director Pete Docter said during a recent online press event. And I don't mean the obvious, a man and a woman get together. It's like, why is it that my kids, I have 2 kids, each one is so different? Same genetic stock, same environment, yet each one reacts totally different. How is that possible? So we just explored that idea of where do our personalities come from? Doctor continued, how is it that we're seemingly born into this world with a sense of who we are even before we have a chance to interact with anything? I think most parents have kind of had that experience of watching their kids start with something already instead of being a blank slate. And that's kind of a miracle and kind of a brain scramble. So that was the pitch. And that thing, by the thesis of the movie and by this, is a soul, which is inherently a religious concept. And it's like, to those going, it's a Disney movie, look. All right, listen. If the Disney woke squad is going to pretend like Lottie joking about the prince having a younger brother is grooming, which I think is a very much of a reach and a very, to use a term I know everyone hates now, bad faith reading of the movie, then it is entirely more than fair to address a film in which a black man nearly gives up his life to save the life of an unborn soul is a pro-life movie. If I said that in a sentence, and it wasn't a Pixar Disney movie, you would think it's a God is Not Dead spinoff. And let's not pretend that Disney is not conservative in many ways. I have seen people say this is a thought experiment, and I'm like, why can't you save these thought experiments for the many other white-led projections that you release throughout the year? Why, when it's time for us to have our black movies, we gotta deal with all these non-black co-leads? I feel like in both Soul and The Princess and the Frog, there is a lack of ground up level storytelling, of wanting to tell a specific black story. Just picking a location and a genre of music does not inherently make it black. Not in the same way that Encanto is Colombian or Coco is Mexican or Moana is Polynesian. And if we're being frank about it, there's something to be said that Encanto, Moana, and Coco did not have a very diverse creative team behind them. They have, like, I believe one co-writer, one co-director a piece. These are not own voices stories, but they still had enough focus and attachment into making a story invested in the culture that they were telling about. And that has not existed for the black stories that they've done. And it's very distressing. I want a level of investment in a black story because we have folklore and culture right for that exploration. I don't need perfection, but I do need more than jazz. And it just feels like a lack of understanding what makes black culture so rich, and a massive oversight on their part as creatives. And I think what makes all of this really distressing from a cultural critic standpoint, not even from film, but that's a cultural critic, is that Disney as a company, is that they have crafted a persona and a branding and a marketing that really asks us as people, especially who grew up with Disney movies, to inherently have an investment in them representing us on screen, to the point where the topic of representation becomes the entire focus of the story and not the effort, the authenticity of what they put into it. And I think we have seen very recently with Encanto, Turning Red, Coco, how even when it's not perfect, having an authentic story, a story that emotionally attaches to its characters, is meaningful, especially when you cast it properly. And how when you don't cast movies properly and you make lazy choices, it creates an environment where people feel very afraid or trepidatious about talking about how these stories impact people. And then you end up with, well, the mess that we have been living in for a really long time. When I first watched Princess and the Frog, I really loved it because I was a 17-year-old kid and I was excited to finally have my princess, you know. No more culturally insensitive Esmeralda costumes for me. I then saw it a year later at the college theater that showed films later for students with my white friends, and they made fun of it the whole time. And I remember I was so mad, you know, they love Disney movies. How did they make fun of my Disney movie? And I watched it again years later after I slowly built up my critical eye, and I realized those white people were right. The movie isn't great, and there is a lot there to mock and groan about, especially the talking animal sidekicks. But I realized that while they may have been correct, it didn't make the glee I felt that I saw in them making fun of it better. It hurt me more than it probably should have because I did want the representation. I sat through every mediocre white Disney princess movie and it was my turn. You know, y'all just got Tangled that same year. It's my turn. Even of those of us who are critical of Disney and understand its problems and how it can be repetitive and regurgitate what's popular, when it's your thing, even on a very superficial level, it becomes difficult to differentiate between what is actual criticism of the story and what feels like an attack on you personally. When I watched Jiran J. Zhao's presentation on Raya and the Last Dragon, a lot of things really resonated with me, especially how the term listen to POC has been weaponized and utilized not to actually allow BIPOC audiences to discuss and engage with works that are representing us and how we may feel about them, especially when they're not made by us. It so easily becomes a way for the internet at large to engage in, and I know everyone hates this term now, bad faith arguments against whatever white person the internet has decided that they know parasocially. A lot of people feel like bad faith just means that you're lying. And what bad faith really means fundamentally, and what it means for the sake of how we deal with criticism, is that bad faith means that when you're entering an argument or discussion, you are coming into it with your biases, not just against the topic, but against the person who is presenting the topic. That you are already coming in with a desire to win, not to engage, with a desire to take down that person, where you believe that that person is inherently wrong because of who they are, and every point they make you will feel you will take to the less charitable degree, in comparison to good faith, where you will honestly and earnestly engage with this person because even if you disagree, they are the right kind of person you should disagree with, and therefore you're willing to have that conversation. The problem I see in a lot of online discussions is the assumption that the default of a discourse is good faith, and that is just not the reality. People's good or bad faith assumptions is, at least online, purely determined by how they feel about the person making the argument, and not about the argument itself, which is inherently a problem. But I get why that happens. There are good reasons for that lack of good faith, and there are bad ones. You know, I, for example, tread lightly when asked to explain a topic concerning race, because I have gotten so often white people approaching me saying they want a discussion when they really just want to yell at me and belittle me. At the same token, there are people who see the topics I discuss, see my race and my queerness, and assume that anything I'm going to say is going to be race wank, that I don't have any actual valid points and discussions. And like, these are both bad faith because they aren't based on an individual's argument, they are based on perception. And the problem that this becomes is that when it comes to things that are crossing across racial lines, we aren't allowed to be honest about the various reasons people develop bad faith readings. Especially those of us who are on this left-leaning political side that we're supposedly engaging in. You know, sometimes it is a general malaise of, I'm tired of hearing white opinions on this topic. That is a valid feeling. That is a valid feeling that we have, especially when we think about how there's an overwrought of white reviewers. And we shouldn't have to turn the white person behind that opinion into a more nefarious figure to say, I wish we had more blank writers writing about this show, movie, topic. Like, that is a fine thing to say without it needing to throw one person under the bus. Like, I know that Princess and the Frog is not a good or top tier Disney movie. I also don't really want to engage with white takes on it, even if they are thoughtful. So I just don't. And I think that's the thing too, is like, some of us don't make that choice to not. We just honestly keep picking at it. Like, I remember for a while, the reviewer for Black Lightning on the AV Club was a white dude. And it wasn't bad, but there were certain times where I felt like he was missing out on a certain nuance that was like black related. And I was like, why didn't a black person get this gig? And so that's a thing where, like, I knew he was good at his job, but there was always this level of bad faith, and that is a level of bad faith that we don't get to talk about, because we're always trying to pretend that, like, our feelings and our learned reactions due to being marginalized people have to be broken down to the most sociological form that it can take, when really it's a culmination of living experiences that harden us to the idea that certain people can approach us in good faith, and that can be harmful in certain ways when engaging with people online that we do not know. Specifically, to go into the Raya situation, I know that I saw comparisons from Southeast Asians comparing Avatar: The Last Airbender to Raya from jump. There was this one article that I really liked by this Malaysian and Southeast Asian reviewer, which breaks down the similarities between the two. You know, I went back to blogs that I frequent and looked at the comments, and there are multiple comparisons to Raya and Korra from people of all backgrounds, saying it reminded them of that. But when the whole scandal, which Riotgate is what it's called somewhat, if you don't know what that is, it was basically when my friend Lindsay Ellis wrote a tweet comparing Avatar: The Last Airbender to Raya the Last Dragon, and there was an assumption on the parts of people that she was making a comparison that these two products were similar because they were Asian, and not because if you watch the film, there is a very clear step-by-step similarity between these two, and is brought up in the Raya presentation. And there are very clear comparisons from this. The people involved with Raya leaned into it.
But if a comparison was made on narrative, structural, and thematic similarities, then it's not racist just because they both happen to be Asian-inspired fantasy stories. It's understandable that for some Southeast Asian diaspora, after dealing with microaggressions leading up to Ellis's tweets, reacted defensively to seeing their one mainstream piece of representation get compared to the mostly East Asian world of Avatar. But this doesn't justify engaging in bad faith. Even if your anger is justified, it's irresponsible to misplace that anger on someone who made a founded comparison based on having already watched the movie.
And I think when I was seeing this happen with the comparison and just the arguments that were being made from people defending Raya and trying to paint Lindsay as this nefarious actor, they would say things like, well, they have one or two Southeast Asian writers on this team, and this is similar to other things that are East Asian, even though it's a Southeast Asian story. And the inherent way that we've been taught when it comes to this kind of criticism is that like something bad must have happened, you know? Like I remember seeing the similarities between Raya and Avatar, and I thought, well, I must be wrong because I'm not Southeast Asian. I knew that was false on a certain level because I had seen Southeast Asian criticism of Raya beyond this one post. I'd also watched both products, so it wasn't like I was just saying, oh, because they're Asian, they're both the same. And as someone who is a person of color, who's Black, and has an issue with Soul and Princess and the Frog, and can see the very similarities between them, not only by having one Black co-writer and director each. And you know, it's like, it was an interesting moment where I realized that like, as much as we talk about wanting to engage with things critically, there is this fear of being wrong and offending people that makes it seem as though we can't, as people of color, engage critically with the text. Like, you know, Soul and Princess and the Frog are very similar in certain ways in how they handle certain themes. There's a reason why when there is a Black person turned into an animal, we discuss that as a trope. There's a reason why Anastasia and Thumbelina and Quest for Camelot all got compared to Disney movies, even though they are not perfect expias of any Disney movies. There are just similarities in the way certain things are structured. People were saying like, well, there was one Southeast Asian person on Raya, and as I just said before in this video, there is one Black person on both Princess and the Frog and Soul. Doesn't make it a truly authentic watch. And by the time I logged in during Riotgate, I think the thing that I think has stuck with me the most is that people, and especially white people, and you know who you are because a lot of you follow me and I've seen you guys were doing it, were memeing it. At a certain point, it stopped being about a discussion about, does Raya do right by Southeast Asians on a deeper level than just the images you see in terms of casting. Like, I mean, that's one of the first things I noticed about Raya, is that like there were barely any Southeast Asians in the casting, and it stopped being about those issues and about one white woman's opinion. It's such a very superficial way of dealing with these issues. It wasn't until a year later that people were actually, especially Southeast Asians, were allowed to actually say, yeah, we actually think that Raya is similar to this. It actually does have problems. Other people have said this and they didn't get this whack. It's like this intersection between misogyny and racism happened so strongly to a degree that because it was the right kind of person to blame, it stopped being about the text. And I think that's why I wanted to make this video, because I understand that as somebody who, like I said, when I hear white people talk about Princess and the Frog, it does, even though I know they're making good points, it does bring up my hackles. And it's because we should be the ones talking about that and supporting each other. But at every turn, it's never about supporting other people of color. It becomes about how can we dunk on a white woman that we have decided is the appropriate person to dunk on today. And I think it's also raised this whole, like, and I hate that I know this term, but like idpol, like identity politics thing, like that's what some people are using about like, because a person is this, that they are inherently right. And I feel like I hate that we have to have the discussion when we talk about BIPOC criticism. Like, BIPOC people are not inherently perfect. If being Black automatically made you thoughtful, progressive, and possessing the ability to critically think, we wouldn't have hoteps. And there are a lot more nuances to this conversation about all of this that would make this video even longer. I don't want to keep raving, but what I just keep coming back to is that I am frustrated. I am frustrated because as someone who has been on this platform for half my life, dear God, I know people have been fighting on the front lines of LGBTQ BIPOC discourse. There have been people working to bring to light the things that fandom have ignored, have dismissed. I was just talking to a group of friends of mine when we were in Vegas about how I would love to actually discuss the Harry Potter fandom before J.K. Rowling was outed as a TERF, because there were BIPOC fans of Harry Potter who had been bringing up the racism, anti-Semitism, and problematic stuff in the books from jump. But we're being told that the work was just too progressive, that we were overthinking it. And it's now that people know that she's a TERF that people are actually doing that work. But a lot of it is disingenuous. A lot of it is just for the clout chasing of the time. And it stings to see that work, that language, that thoughtful passion co-opted in a way to only create drama and not impact change. And it really is to prove that we ascend into the highest place of wokeness and signaling when we can't admit that we were wrong, especially when the same people who believe in criminal justice reform and ending carceral systems still think that the only kind of damage that can be done to someone's spirit and creativity and their mind is money. You know, cancel culture may not exist in the way that Republicans say it does, but people are not acting with the consistency and grace and advocacy that they promote. Researchers have spent years showing why the mob is wrong, why juries get it wrong, why the legal system gets it wrong. Yet we act with a vile ego that assumes that we have gotten it right. I think the reason why this id pol argument, identity politics argument, really bothers me is because it is used to flatten all of the dynamics and nuance, because it's on my mug for a reason, all the nuance that comes with having a relationship to the internet, in which you have been constantly, especially if you are a BIPOC creator, a marginalized creator, having constantly been asked for, literally in my case, over a decade, to constantly explain and reiterate things to people who willingly are trying to trick you or fool you or manipulate you with their words. There is also this new element of people who are very performative, and now that it has been normalized as to be progressive, it does also affect the way people interact with each other. These are not just black and white issues, and it's frustrating because I don't think I'm right because I'm black. My blackness informs how I feel, what I think, but I also do research and read, and I come from someone who has a background in literary criticism. I am doing this because one, I enjoy it, and B, because I think it is good work to have this communication. But it also means that I have read criticism from people who I do not agree with. I do not like Harold Bloom at all. I think he's an asshole, but I've read his work. I understand why he feels the way he feels. I listen to his criticism so I can understand why I feel the way I do. And I feel like that is somehow being lost by people trying so much to perform actions of identity, to perform this online activism without actually integrating it into what they do in their daily lives. And it does end up impacting and hurting marginalized people. Two really important examples to bring up in this conversation are Isabel Fall and Mahmoud Doucouré, because both of them are marginalized people who really dealt with sort of this hyper policing of criticism without actually any thought being put back into it. And I think that we haven't learned any lessons from this situation and are still perpetuating these issues. Back in January of 2020, Isabel Fall wrote a short story called I Sexually Identify as an Attack Helicopter. The title was taken from an internet meme that is usually used to troll or dismiss trans identity. Therefore, A, some assume that the writer wasn't trans, and B, harassed Fall, calling the story harmful. In June 2021, Emily St. James wrote about the response to this story and how it affected Fall as a trans woman. Fall ended up in a psychiatric hospital because of suicidal ideation, and the comments about her being a man as to why she wrote her story as she did increased her gender dysmorphia. Now people look at Fall's story and use it as an example of trans misogyny, which is true, but what gets erased is what people were saying about the story in 2020 as it was happening on Twitter. I don't want to put all the names on the screen because I don't want people to be harassed, but I am going to read this quote that I think is really important to understand. This reads like it was written by a straight white dude who doesn't really get gender theory or transition and has no right to invoke transphobic dog whistles for profit. These are the kind of comments that were happening, and while there was some attempt to be nuanced, because there always is, very loudly these were the takes that were being amplified online and regurgitated, and this is what people who were not interacting with the work were parroting and saying. And of course, if the whole thing is listen to people in this community and you see people retweeting their one reliant source, people are going to believe that. And the more people who retweet it without actually engaging with the subject matter, with the text, with the art, aw, my cat just put it on her belly, will increase this way that we sort of circle as using bad faith criticism importantly. As St. James tweeted, a number of people insist that the attack the helicopter situation started with good faith criticism, then spiraled out of control. But that's not true. What good faith criticism existed, some of which Isabel Fall took to heart, came after the spiral. When authors like Carmen Maria Machado and Chuck Tingle praised the story that was seen as a strike against Fall because, quote, why this story? Why the wrong trans story? There were people who felt like this being platformed was a slap in the face to other trans writers. And I think it's so important about this criticism, and what we should learn from the situation is that people who believe in social justice, when they see these things happening, assume that there is good faith criticism even when they don't see it. If they see the right kind of buzzwords coming from the right kind of people, they will assume it is right and not do any research or due diligence. No one really cared about Fall's feelings until they broke her. And then we were collectively able to be sad about it. Then we were able to collectively discuss it. But it didn't erase that they still took the criticism of her story beyond the pale and simply decided who she was based on their feelings of her work, rather than actually assuming that maybe this is a trans person who is dealing with this in her own way. It completely flattened the discussions, and that even trans people who did like the story were not allowed to talk about why they liked the story because it was just being put into this rabbit hole. And this is the problem, is that it stops being about the creation and it makes it seem as though trans critics and trans writers are not actually people who do work. Everyone on Twitter is not a critic, and it's okay to say that. Like, it's not elitist to say that not everyone is able to do that work. I think Ibram X Kendi made a really good point on a For Harriet video that not every Black person is an African American historian. We are not a monolith, and yet whenever something happens on Twitter about a product that has representation on it, all of a sudden every single individual is looked at as a complete expert on the subject, regardless of if they have engaged with the work, regardless of if they've read the work. I really find it frustrating as someone who loves criticism as an art form, as a work, that there is more to the discussion about a work than how it makes you superficially feel. And I think that's hard because for so long, I think this is very key, for so long, we were struggling just to have it be understood that, like, we shouldn't have to engage with every single piece of problematic text to feel uncomfortable with it. And there are things I feel uncomfortable by that I will probably never engage with. And I have learned that it is okay for me to say, like, I've never seen it, this is how I feel about it. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but I don't know, this is just how I feel about it. And that should just be what it's taken as, a feeling. It's not an informed opinion, and it's okay. Not every opinion that we need to share online needs to be an essay, a thesis, a YouTube video that is way too long. The same people who feel so much empathy for Fall and lament what happened to her have harassed BIPOC queer people in her name, which, you know, if Fall feels a little bit of Schadenfreude glee about that, that's fine. Like, that, she's allowed to feel that way. But us as individuals, what are we doing that's actually helping her? And I think with empathy, I understand how difficult it can be to see someone in your community succeed at art that you feel you've done better than, and you struggle to get the same amount of acknowledgement. I get that. I watched a video about The Flash from a big name Black YouTuber that I enjoyed, but when they talked about Iris, they didn't bring up misogynoir, which is misogyny specifically against Black women in fandom. And I remember having my YouTube comment fingers primed to say something, and then I realized, you know what? Maybe they are just unaware and viewing this from a purely textual level. Maybe they don't feel the need to break into that. Maybe they understand that that's an issue, but is not the focus of this video. I want to make that video. I feel self-conscious that I want to make that video, and it might not get the same numbers as this person, and therefore I feel like, well, you have the platform, so you should say everything at once. And that is an unrealistic expectation to put onto somebody. And I felt more at peace once I could say that, because it's a real feeling that is based on real frustration, not just with the algorithm, but how you engage with your peers. And I think so often we are taking all of the anger about our voices not being heard and putting that onto the people whose voices are being heard and saying like, why them and not me? We know why. We know the algorithm is racist. We know how people get chosen out of a bucket and somehow get engaged. We know what happens when someone knows somebody and platforms someone. Like if you see a gap in a piece of criticism, then you fill it. Because you're the one who wants to engage with that, and you should be the one to do that. Mahmoud Doucouré was the director and writer of the 2020 film Cuties. If you want more information on the details of the film, you can check out For Harriet, Teen Noirs, or my previous video on the topic. When Netflix released a gross poster of the film, it unleashed a torrent of criticism about the film, assuming what it was accused of hypersexualization of young girls, despite the fact that Doucouré was very clear that the film was really invested in critiquing how hypersexualization affects young girls of color, specifically young Black girls growing up in the West. You know, there was a psychologist assisting the child actresses. The film was a lot more nuanced and thoughtful than anyone was giving it credit for. Yes, there were some clumsy moments, but this was Doucouré's first movie. But so many people review bombed it, assumed they knew the narratives it was saying about Islam based on the half-baked concerned trolling of some people like Ted Cruz. And by the way, Netflix is still embroiled in a lawsuit in Texas about this movie, trying to accuse it of doing child pornography. Like on September 23rd of 2020, Netflix was indicted by a Texas grand jury for promotion of lewd visual materials depicting a child. It's madness. It ignored Doucouré came from the background she was discussing, that she did the research, and that she did her best to protect the children involved. Yet she got death threats, all because people wanted to perform activism without doing any of the work. And you were allowed to watch Cuties and feel uncomfortable. There was a lot of discomfort, but I remember For Harriet was discussing the nuances and complexities of the film, and a commenter said that she was gaslighting them by disagreeing. This is not what gaslighting means. These are two of the biggest examples of cancel culture we have seen in terms of, I think there's a difference between Republican cancel culture and I think, let's say, this is like trial by Twitter. We have seen these two examples of sort of like liberal cancel culture. We have seen actively delay and harm people. And this is not white men or even marginalized people with real political or social power, but marginalized artists trying to tap into something real for them that was taken in bad faith by people, even within their own community, who believed that they were doing a good thing by dragging them. And this is the environment in which people are critiquing. And I remember Charles, when he wrote, and I always talk about Angela Bastian, but like whenever they make a criticism video or criticism article about Blackness and Black film, they are always called a downer. They are always being called all these names, ignoring the fact that they're doing work, that they are talking about something broader than representation. Representation is not just Princess and the Frog and Soul. This video was a lot longer and rantier than I expected. I was hoping that it would be half this length, but the more I wrote, the more upset I got and the more things I wanted to kind of put into this, because Twitter has turned criticism into warfare and it impacts us all. And also Disney has such a chokehold over the culture that we spend so much time defending these films that have spent less time actually thinking about the Blackness, Asianness that they are putting on screen. I don't want to be in a place critically where movies like Soul get more protection than a movie like Cuties, which has so much more to say about the Black existence in the modern era than something like Soul. I don't want to be in a place where everyone understands the psychological harm done to Isabel Fall, but doesn't do the work to actually stop this knee-jerk behavior that has led to the harm. Because you know what? She has gotten nominated for awards. She has gotten a lot of support. Does that mean she wasn't harmed? Sure, she wasn't canceled, but she suffered. And I will add this as a purely shallow, transparent note. Lindsay Ellis is my friend, and I've always been very wary of defending her in public because I know, and I'm gonna be very honest about this, there is nothing to be gained on an optics level from being seen to be defending a white woman, even if you think that they are correct. It is really wrenching to me that people will not acknowledge the immense amount of bullshit that they pulled during this whole thing that had nothing to do with Southeast Asian people or representing them, but all about trying to drag her and feeling so comfortable in that. And I think the thing that people don't get is that they think they were just putting out something for white people to be like, ha, see what happens when it gets you. What a lot of us who are creators saw is that in a tweet that you were saying comparing two products about having a similarity having to do with structure, not culture, can suddenly lead to people assuming the absolute worst thing about you. It's so disheartening to see. And I think that if anything, I feel really guilty that when it was happening, I felt like I had to say something when honestly, I could have said nothing, but that would be a cowardly thing to do as well. But most importantly, that I knew that there was an element of bullshit and I didn't say anything because I assumed that I must be wrong. And I think there's something to be said about the same people who say, listen to Southeast Asian voices, POC voices, have watched the Raya presentation, listen to the voice of Southeast Asian people talking about this whole thing with such nuance and care and clarity, but have no ability to see how they silence those voices. And that's kind of the thing, is like when I think about how Disney has failed Black folks, brown folks in general, it's not just making subpar movies, it's not just in the stereotypes, but in creating an environment in which young people are taught so much to put all of their cultural representational stakes into a company, a monopoly that wanted to trademark Hakuna Matata and Dia de los Muertos. And that in that environment, we have created a culture that really sees criticism and critique and analysis of film to be anathema to good discourse. Anyway, I'm exhausted. TLDR, Soul sucks. Tiana is great. Afro-punk Disney Princess 2024. And you know what? Turning Red was so good. Was both written and directed by someone of Chinese heritage and by someone who was of Korean heritage, proving that you can have a film with a BIPOC character turning it into an animal and still somehow have pathos if you put in effort. Because Turning Red was giving me so many emotions and feelings that I was like, oh, this is what Princess and the Frog thought it was doing, but never had the spoons to do so. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. I know this was a very heavy video. I know it got into rant territory. I'm still sort of like going back and forth about if this video is good enough or proper enough and if all of it fits together. But I think I genuinely, earnestly have so much anxiety about the world that we are creating and the state of what it means to be a Black critic, because we are the ones who are being put under the scope the most. And the other thing I will say is, like, stop when you're talking to like other progressive people about progressive politics, bring in racists and transphobes. Stop asking me like what I would feel about Candace Owens and whatever. I don't fuck with that bitch. Why the fuck do you think why are you bringing in these? Stop doing hypotheticals, okay? Hypotheticals are annoying. They are the white man's tricks. Stop it. Stop asking me these questions.
Well, back back into the fray.
This video is sponsored by the wonderful members of my Patreon and by CuriosityStream. Get access to my streaming video service, Nebula, when you sign up for CuriosityStream using the link in the description below. If you use my code Melina Pendulum, you get 26% off CuriosityStream and the Nebula package, where you'll get access to videos like mine, which will be extra content for you. And again, you'll get 26% off the annual package, which means you'll get 2 streaming services for $14.79. I've always talked about how much I enjoy CuriosityStream, and I really like the Nebula package. I have some new videos getting ready. I have just finished scripting a video about the movie Passing, and we're gonna do a video about Diana, but the Oscars are coming out, and I wanna see if Kristen Stewart's gonna win her Oscar, but probably not, but we'll see. So it's a great deal. You get a lot of different content, and so many creators use Nebula as a way of doing fun, different kind of videos. So if you like a bunch of us and you hate ads and you really want to see some unique, fun content outside of just the Patreon stuff, sign up for CuriosityStream and the Nebula package, and you get to enjoy all of the delights. And I myself have some exclusive interviews up on there and longer cuts of videos that I have published on here. So it's a really good investment if you like my work. And thank you guys so much for watching. Have a good one.